What's up? All right, let's get into it. And forewarning, I have a lot of short slides, so I'm going to be clicking through those kind of fast. So it might feel like a little bit of an EDM show while we're here, but we'll get through it. So Mike already kind of gave me an introduction. Tech SEO director, web developer, data science enthusiast for like the past 4 years. You can see by my GitHub credentials, I be git pushing that shit. And I'm also a musician. You can see maybe that's a picture of me jumping like 3 feet in the air in LA. If you want to know more on how to do that, you can talk to me afterward. But let's meet Toby here. He's an SEO consultant, uses all the normal tools, but he's been a little bit disappointed with his results from some of his recommendations, or maybe some people are not happy with what's happening outside of his team. He feels stuck. What will move the needle? There's so many things we can do. What's going to be the most impactful, right? And once he decides, how does he know he made the right decision? Like, what can he do to confirm that this decision is the best out of the other options that he has? And that is going to be decision intelligence. And decision intelligence is a discipline, I will say, across various industries, it can mean and represent different things. So when I'm talking about decision intelligence for SEO, that can be a sub-segment of the larger concept and discipline of decision intelligence. So if you go and research this topic, there's a lot of breadth and depth to it. But it's basically the difference between making poor decisions and making really informed decisions, not just the data-driven decisions, really honing in on data and using it the best way that you can. And it's taking your raw data and helping you ask and answer specific questions. What happened? Why is it happening? How to improve outcomes to lead you to the best options and the best decisions that you can make with all available data that you have. And before I actually get into the framework and the meat of the discussion, these are some questions and points that you should be asking. Is your organization even ready for something like decision intelligence? And spoiler, these are great questions to ask potential clients that you're going to onboard, because this can really vet how sophisticated their processes are. So what is their willingness to change? Like, can they pivot, or are they willing to pivot when something contradicts their assumptions, however their assumptions come about? What is their current process? How are their decisions made? I'm going to say most case, instinct, a larger community of like leadership or data. I'm going to probably say it's probably largely the first two, unfortunately. What are their development priorities? Can their development team respond in a timely manner? And like, what do they find valuable with their time? And how are they measuring their decisions? And are they actually doing that accurately? So great questions to ask, and kind of a precursor to if an organization is ready for this. And there's a survey from Gartner on decision intelligence where half the people said that good decisions were defined by the outcome, so the end, while the other 50 said it was defined by its process. And I think that's really interesting, because not all decisions were always going to lead to good outcomes, but if you have a really, really good defined process, you're in the best position to where you're always going to maybe, in most cases, have the best possible option, even if it doesn't lead to the best expected outcomes. So we have the DECIDE model here, which is going to bring us through some steps and a framework that I personally use subconsciously, and now it's real. But we're going to go through each step and kind of what's involved in this process to bring you to the best results you can get from using data. So D, defining your primary goal. And this is the most important step, and this is where probably a lot of SEOs can get stuck or just maybe be a little bit lazy with it. What does success look like for an analysis when you're trying to figure something out? It's the computer science function, fx equals y. You have your inputs, which are your data. It goes through a process, and you have your outputs, which should be your goal. And with your outputs or your goal, is there significance? Do you have enough data? Do you have access to the right data? Is it connected to a business goal and not vanity? Is it clear? Like, can you tell a story about the outcome? You're not just sharing data and saying, hey, figure it out. And is it actionable? Like, will this analysis enable a decision? And there are common analyses that you can use to help define your goals. So These are the four most commonly used in marketing: descriptive, diagnostic, prescriptive, and predictive, and they help you answer these questions. And for the most part, you're probably going to be bucketed into the first two, descriptive and diagnostic, asking like what happened previously or why did something happen. And then there's more advanced where you're doing like, you're asking questions like, what should we do with this data, or like what will happen if we do something, which can get more into like the machine learning territory. These are just a few, or a lot, of examples of like formal analyses that you can make. I mean, this is just to show you like what's possible, but not going to go through these at all, but there's different types of analyses you can perform with data. And when you're defining your goals, this is one of the biggest things: bias. So avoid that shit for real on God. Bias in, bias out. I understand, even some of the best, most well-intentioned SEOs, marketing analysts, whatever, are susceptible to this. And honestly, I think it's pretty harmful because we've all seen those reports that are like really cherry-picked, and like, when someone like screenshots like one fraction of like a GSC chart and they're like, look at this growth. But it definitely harms our industry reputation, because if you see that and you're just getting burned, those are the kinds of things that actually, can impact someone's perception of the industry. So there's confirmation bias, which is seeking data that supports your hypothesis while ignoring evidence. So you have the frickin' blinders on, and this is also very, very common with a lot of junior SEOs, cherry picking things, being dishonest about like what you're including and excluding. Just be honest. Like, use all available data and be a trustworthy partner to whoever you're working with, and be honest with what you're looking at. Selection bias. So analyzing only the successful or visible data while missing the complete picture. So shocker, if you're using GSC and you're just exporting 1,000 rows, you're missing so much data. It's not even funny. Using SEO tools for first-party research, usually not the best option, or sample GA4 data. Outcome bias, which would be defining success criteria after the results. So this is basically, you don't like your analysis, things are not looking great, and you're changing it, or you're trying to remove points to make it more favorable. This is very common as well. We love this one, recency bias, which is overweighing recent data while ignoring patterns. So like, clients love this, we love this, because once there's a spike, we're like, oh my God, it's changed forever. But you kind of need to back up and say, okay, what was the baseline? We always hit that emotional peak. We get those messages on Slack at like, the second we clock in, and then things go back to normal, and it's like, okay, it's interesting to analyze those things, but don't make an entire shift just because one of those events occurs. And just start with a solid hypothesis. If X, then Y, we want to measure success by this, we want to analyze the relationship between this and that. You can come up with some pretty interesting things, and there's obviously a lot of domain expertise involved in this, but it can be just as simple as this. So just some examples of defining some pretty complex goals. So crawled, not indexed. Like everybody, that's like one of the most black box things there is. And what we did with this was we defined the goal as, okay, we know these pages should be indexed. They're indexable. We're submitting them. We want to analyze correlations of the content signals and indexation. And what that led to was we discovered specific attributes that mattered. So in this case, it was using unique images versus placeholders, the stock status, and the availability. Those all had common patterns of those pages being indexed. And the others that we looked at, like reviews and specifications and similarity, they weren't as strong. Another one was, why is our traffic eroding and where? I mean, it's very common. So we want to look at keyword intent groupings and analyze trends. And that output was, you can see, there's about 408,000 keywords, and we grouped those into like 20 to 30 intents, and then we ran a decay analysis on that. You can see there's some obvious intents that are a little more volatile than others. Extract. So this is part of the ETL process, which is a data science process, just to kind of formalize the process and lead you to better analyses. You got to respect the ETL workflow, so extracting your data, pulling it from various sources, transforming, cleaning, joining, enriching, scoring, and then loading, which is basically like your end result of like either a dashboard or a visualization or something you can kind of maybe tell a story with. So not all data sources are created equal. Within our godly tier, BigQuery, your CMS database, your log files, APIs like GSC and GA4, very solid. SERPs, SERP APIs, web scraper, Ahrefs and SEMrush, fine. And the other platforms. They're great for research, not as reliable for analyzing your first-party data or traffic performance. The UIs of GAC or GSC and GA, whatever, they're fine. I would never use these sources for getting data, obviously. And if you are, just you gotta stop right now. For large sites, you don't need to analyze everything. You could use random sampling. And this is a whole other discussion, but you can use stratified sampling. I did fix the typo on that. It showed up again, so I'm not sure what's up there. But basically taking your data set, could be your website, your pages, queries, breaking it down to strata, random selection, and then sampling, and it gives you a distribution of your site without having to analyze like 800,000 pages or 200 million pages, depending on how big your site is. Moving on to transform. Well, this is actually the second part of this process. Cleaning your data, so handling any duplicates, nulls, filtering, enriching, categorizing, labeling, and then joining, just merging various sources by URL, keyword, or date. And transforming data can help you better understand your data, obviously. So distributions are a good way to visualize this aspect, so you can identify outliers, anomalies, and just understand the skew and the weights of your data. So this is an example where we're looking at the distribution of days since last crawled by indexation, and you can see that there's a greater concentration of pages that were indexed when they're more recently crawled versus pages that were, you can see the 130-day rule coming into play here. Just a good way to see how the weights are. So this should tell us, okay, we need to get more pages crawled more frequently because more pages are indexed that are crawled more recently. The Lorenz curve, which is a cumulative distribution, which is, I use this probably most times when I'm looking at getting a representative sample of data, which is a prioritized sample of your data. So what you're seeing here is you're sampling the 70th percentile of pages because they account for 85% of your traffic. So why do you need to even look at the remaining portion if you're really trying to hone in on like the pages that perform the best for your site? Percentiles, which are ways to identify natural breakpoints within your data. This is really interesting for like site audits if you're looking at how a site's built up. Quartile bins, grouping data based on the performance segment to help you understand the weights of your data. So you can see you can almost always categorize pages as 0 clicks into their own bucket. It's likely noise for maybe your analysis. And then you have your buckets of the 20th percentile to the 90th, depending on what you're prioritizing, whether you want to prioritize the 25th percentile or the 90th percentile, which would be the high performers. You at least know how those pages are divided up. Violin plots or box plots, you can use it to actually visualize the spread and variance across different metrics to identify opportunities. So this is an example where we looked at internal linking distribution by site segment. And you can see that the median internal links for segment 1, since it's not as long, were lower than the other segments. That was actually the most important segment of the site. So there's a clear opportunity that we need to have more internal links for those pages in segment 1. Data labeling, assigning meaningful categories to unstructured data. You could transfer your raw data into analyzable segments. And this really just shows more meaningful insights. When you group things together, you kind of bring it all together and condense it, and you're not looking at individual rows of data anymore. Performance labels are a great way to do this, and you can do this many different ways, but it's dividing pages into segments based on how they perform. So we had 4 click bands here, which is like the number of clicks pages got. And what we found what was interesting is that over time, in this example, there were more pages that had higher click performance that were going down at indexation, and then there were pages that had lower click performance that were going up in indexation. So it's a way to see an interesting problem happen when you look at it from this perspective. This is a little more complicated, rule-based category groups. So using metric groups and category groups to understand different performance across your different categories. So this was basically looking at when we actually have categories on a site, we can create crawl buckets based off like the recency of the crawl. And you can see from the left to the right, the gray means that that category was not crawled. So like the first two categories, almost 80% of those pages in that category haven't been crawled. So that's a clear opportunity when going down that scale in descending order that there's some categories that definitely need to be having some attention. Correlations, use these cautiously. It's helpful to understand relationships between variables, but some things move together more obviously. So multidimensional correlations, looking at like discovery crawls versus refresh crawls versus indexation. There was a positive correlation. I mean, this p-value is very debated in the data science community, so I'm just going to keep it very simple and keep that, if it's below 0.05, it suggests that there's significance. But what we found here was that discovery crawls and indexation specifically were really closely related in correlation. And be skeptical of correlations. Like they occur, but they're good for hypothesis testing. But just because there's a strong correlation doesn't equal causation, obviously. Some make sense. Index, clicks, impressions. We know that impressions and indexation move very closely together. Sometimes clicks. It's not as strong, but you can see the correlations here. Some don't make sense, but are interesting. I'm really not going to kind of go into detail with this one. It was looking at sitemap index order and URL order within the sitemaps, and then the crawl frequency. It was inconclusive, but you just never know sometimes. If you want to ask me about that one, you could ask me. It's a little complicated. Classifying your priority level. So transform, connecting your business value with data and working towards what matters. Sorry, I'm just reading off my slides here. So priority can be risks, like impact of loss, decay of a metric, instability, threshold breach, looking at crawl budget inefficiency. And then there's opportunities, things like potential for gain, underperforming assets, growth trajectory, optimizing for upward momentum, efficiency gaps, underutilized assets, so like things like good positions but low clicks. This is an example of using where we're looking at potential for gains within crawl budget. So we saw that Bing was crawling very aggressively in relation to Googlebot. And in this client specifically, the value of Googlebot's indexation within Google was much more valuable than Bing. So we applied a crawl delay. And then you can see the clear trade-off here where the crawling of Googlebot greatly improved, and that led to a higher brand exposure, which was their business value in this case. Also running a risk analysis for a nav bar. So in this case, it would be optimizing a nav bar. So this client wanted us to potentially remove or change things in their nav bar. And we basically looked at like engagement, link equity, and revenue attribution to find items within those categories within their nav that were high risk and low risk. So you can see like there's specific categories that are really strongly purple, meaning like, okay, we shouldn't touch those. They have a lot of those combined metrics. And then other categories like 6 and 9 where there were some lower risk items where we wouldn't really have as much impact on the site. Content decay, this is also like very, very common, because period over period, month over month, year over year, you're missing the entire context of data in between those points. So if you're analyzing just 2 points in time, you're missing an entire piece of context. So metric slopes are much more meaningful and actually give you true representation of like pages that are either sloping upward or downward. Year over year or period over period are fine, but there's a lot missing there. Integrating your multiple data sources. So you might be solving the wrong problem perfectly. We do this all the time where, Core Web Vitals, for example. Merging various data sources allow you for priority to be even more clear. So looking at Search Console alone, right? High impressions, okay, what does that mean? Is it a priority? What's it doing? GA4 alone, this page has engagement. Is it valuable? What do we do with it? Revenue data alone, it sells well, but like how is SEO involved in that process? Not getting the whole picture there. Integrated view, just combining GSC, GA4, and conversion data, highly valuable. There's so many different ways you can like cross-reference different changes in the metrics between the data source to come up with different opportunities. Crawl logs and GA4, AI referrals, looking at like maybe optimized internal linking based off of what bots are crawling and what sort of referrals you're getting from AI sources. That's the only time I mentioned AI. Efficiency gaps. So this is where we're looking at Search Console, GA4, and conversions. And you can see that roughly like maybe 70% of their revenue was coming from a source that wasn't SEO. So we can ask the question of like, okay, maybe SEO can play a larger role in revenue. Like maybe there's something we need to prioritize differently within our products. You can use different weighted averages. This is good for like impact and priority scoring. This is just one example. You can use your own weights and your own variables there. I'm going to skip through this one. This is actually something that I have that's open source on my GitHub. It's a way to take a screaming frog crawl with GA4, GSC, and actually get like an impact score where like if, higher impacts, lower impacts, just allows you to have more direction on your audits and stop having those checklists. For priority scoring, very simple. This is a very simple example of that, but you can create your own proprietary weights with this. But this is a good way to actually like get sort of like, okay, we know the impact, but what's the priority with the business, with the operation? So you can, label things low, medium, high, provide a number to those values, urgency, capacity with development, and have a priority score based on that. So you can create your own weights to do this to be much more sophisticated. This is just simple for example's sake. And up until this point, we're up to this part where you have basically from the start, you have someone ask you a question. There's an external event, something happening, so you're looking at data, you go through all the steps, and if you aren't passing your priority score, if it's not greater than a certain threshold, maybe that's something that needs to go on the backlog. If it does, then maybe we need to move further with the process. So the fifth, second to last step here would be distributing your data, which is part of the load of the ETL process. And stakeholders are more likely to misinterpret your data. I mean, it's just kind of how it is sometimes. Give up, have biases. So convert your data into actual insights. You have your raw data, goes through the processing, it gets organized, post-processing, then you have your insightful data. You can do this programmatically. I mean, there's a little bit of like, developer knowledge here, but there are some interesting ways you can do this based off of patterns within your data. So conditional-based summaries. This was an example of where we took canonical patterns that were happening within like the actual strings of the URLs and created unique, labeling for each of those instances. And it's much better than showing like, just simple examples or like, maybe it's complex data patterns and you just want to get the message across of what's happening. And in this case, it was locales canonically to non-locale pages, which were 76% of this issue here. Condition-based summaries and filtering. This was where we're looking at different slopes of pages, and we sectioned out the pages that were having negative performance from a click and position perspective, siloed those out, and those are the pages that's your target data set for prioritizing your content and possibly refreshing. And then this one is, like multiple steps involved here, condition-based summaries and intent labeling. So basically isolating your keywords per decaying page, labeling the keyword intents, showing the trends, and then kind of overlaying with anything like a Google update. And now we can see that there's a high value intent there that we know is declining. So we already know what the pages are, the keywords are. We can then optimize and maybe hopefully address what's happening there. Since we need to be using spreadsheets, always have a summary column. I mean, I deleted Excel like 2 years ago and told myself I'd never use it again, but I still have to use it, unfortunately. So put a summary slide or summary column wherever you can and, help those unfortunate souls. And speak towards the interests of your stakeholders as best as you can. Data as the foundation, a little bit of analytics know-how, that is going to go a long way. Storytelling, being able to tell a story with your data, and then the actual expertise of your client or your business or your site. And then the last and final step here, since we're coming to the end, is you made it. If you don't have next steps, what's the point? You have your analysis, okay, cool. But what are you going to do with it? Like, it needs to lead to something. So it can be something like, okay, sharing a new opportunity. Are you updating content, removing pages? Are you just sharing a hypothesis? Are you clarifying a concern? It could be. These are all important things to share. Just because something is maybe not going to lead to like the best decision you can share possible, there's still information worth sharing with a really well planned out analysis. So when you're executing, establish your benchmark, implement, Annotate and measure for at least 3 months, and then report on the outcomes, noting any sort of like external changes or factors like Google updates, I guess no AI updates, everything that's happening in the world, whatever you're into. Keep a running log of everything that happens on a site. I do this, and then I kind of remove the ones that I don't want and some that I do like, but you can have like site updates with Google updates and kind of like keep track of what's happening with your site. So start feeling more better about your decisions with data and use my framework. Don't use it. Thanks.